Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. Not that I've seen that in about 5 months, but you know. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight we are going to talk about Season 2 of The Boys, the angry superhero-hating TV show from Amazon, based of course on the comic by Garth Ennis and Derek Robertson. And then we will be covering Biohackers, a new German sci-fi series from Netflix about making rats glow in the dark. But before all of that, before we even do the thing we normally do before all of that, I'm going to throw in the mandatory Kickstarter plug now. As mentioned twice last episode, and twice more now, my new comic And It Snowed, an urban fantasy crime fable about running away from Jack Frost in a snowy London, is on Kickstarter now. It's gone pretty well. We've funded. You will definitely get a copy if you go ahead and buy one. And yeah, you can find it by going to the links, which will probably be in the show notes or scattered all over the social media feed of both me and this podcast. Thank you very much to those of you who listen to the podcast who have already backed. And yes, if anyone else wants to do so, you've got about 2 more weeks. I believe the Kickstarter ends on the day that our next episode comes out. So if you want to make sure you get a copy, maybe worth doing it now rather than waiting for my next reminder. When that reminder drops, you'll have about 3 hours. And anyway, after that, on with the actual show. Alistair, what else have you consumed in the last fortnight?
So I've watched an interesting show on Netflix I'd like to recommend to our listeners.
Is it in a foreign language?
No, it is in English, but it's not set in an English-speaking country.
Okay,
so,
just checking. Yeah.
No, I'm breaking the pattern of the last few episodes, but this is an English language drama set in Israel and Syria called The Spy, which is about an Israeli man who becomes a spy in Syria in the 1960s. Kind of the most interesting thing about this show is that it's a pretty tense drama, but the main character is played by Sacha Baron Cohen of, Borat, Ali G, Bruno, and lots of other things fame. And it is him doing a straight up dramatic performance. And he can really act, which probably shouldn't be a surprise in that being very good at comedy means he's got like a range of skills. We've talked, I think, before about how when we talked about Uncut Gems, we said that, like Adam Sandler is a very talented comedian. It shouldn't surprise us so much that actually he's good in like doing a dramatic part. And once again here, Sacha Baron Cohen is great in this dramatic role. It's just a really good, solid, tense spy film. It's from the sort of realistic genre of spy stuff. There's no like invisible cars or things like that. It's very much a lot of people in rooms talking about spy stuff. But it is, when the tension builds up, it is really, really tense. And you kind of forget that it's Sacha Baron Cohen, aka Borat, which is, I guess the mark of a really great actor, that you forget that they're the person they are and believe in the character.
So is this going to be his Truman Show? Is this going to be the moment where everyone goes, holy shit, such range? I haven't really seen many people talking about this.
No, it came out last year. I was just looking and it did get some Golden Globe nominations, but it doesn't seem to have the huge impact you might have thought it had. Yeah, I don't know if Sacha Baron Cohen thought this would be a chance to show his range. He executive produced the show as well, so I don't know. I get the feeling this is something of a passion project or something he was invested in. But I'm surprised it hasn't received more of it's not having a bigger impact than it has, because it is quite remarkable how good an actor Sacha Baron Cohen is. But I'm surprised it's not picked up more. But maybe this is the sign his next dramatic role might have a bigger impact, and people will be like, oh yeah, he was good in The Spy, so no wonder he's good in I don't know, whatever he does next.
Supporting role in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Yeah. Because I don't think I'd have heard about this at all if not for you mentioning it to me now, and I think once or twice before. So yeah, this passed me by entirely on its actual release. I've not really seen any Twitter chatter. But yeah, no, it looks good based on the tiny bit I've seen. Yeah.
No, I would definitely recommend it, especially if you're interested in spy films, and especially if you're into the more, I don't know, I struggle to say realistic, because I'm sure there's lots of like unrealistic things about it, or they've taken liberties with what actually happened. But if you're into like spy films more like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, then as opposed to sort of the James Bond's side of spying, I would recommend this. And also if you're interested in the history of the Middle East and the conflicts between Israel and Syria, because there's a lot of interesting history, and they weave bits of history into the plot. It's a surprising one. I didn't see anything about it on Twitter or anything. Someone recommended it to me. I was like, oh, you really have to watch this. And then when they said, Sacha Baron Cohen, but like not being funny, I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. I do have to see it.
So you mentioned what actually happened in history a couple of times there. So is it based on true events?
Yeah, it's based on a real story, I think, as it says at the beginning. And just after just Googling some details, I have seen various articles I think Times got an article here that says the true story behind The Spy, in which explains what really happened. Yeah, I think it's based on a real story. I'm kind of dancing around kind of what happens because there are some big twists, especially towards the end, that it's really best not knowing. It did not end the way I thought it would end.
Okay. No, it's okay. Just leave the spoilers for now. It's conceivable I might one day watch this.
I would recommend it, yeah. It's a undiscovered gem on Netflix. Anyway, Nick, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, I've been reading a few standalone graphic novels, actually. That seems to be a thing I'm doing, and my favourite of them, I might mention another one as well, but my favourite of them has been Americana and the Act of Getting Over It. That is what it's called, isn't it? Yep. By Luke Healy, which is a book that came out from the British indie publisher Nobrow last year. It's a mostly graphic novel, sometimes prose, travelogue book about this cartoonist Luke Healy and his lifelong fascination with America and how he decides to sort of forcibly get himself over it by going on this like epic hike called, he keeps calling it the PCT, and I've actually now, it's been so long since I started the book, I've actually forgotten what PCT stands for. The Pacific Crest Trail, there we go. Which basically runs from the south border with Mexico to the north border with Canada, up the sort of west side of the country through California and Oregon and Washington. And it's a bit of a quest, as you might imagine. It takes him about 6 months, the whole event in total. And it's, as you might imagine, from a hike that long over some quite mountainous territory, it's quite a lot of pain, endurance, and yeah, it's a very nicely paced emotional journey, and he's got some fun sort of cartooning of himself struggling over this beautiful scenery. It's a lovely book, I recommend.
This is another recommendation based on a true story, or
yes,
something that actually happened.
It's true, as far as I'm aware, unless there's been some serious fabrication, Luke Healy did indeed hike the PCT.
That does sound actually really interesting. The thing it most brings to mind is something we covered in the podcast way back when we were doing the tag team recommendation thing, that when we covered Guy Delisle's book, Jerusalem, which I guess is another graphic artist, illustrator, doing a comic about his own life.
Well, yeah, it is interesting because, yeah, you read a lot of autobiographical graphic novels. Yeah, I don't know, it's always just odd reading these long stories about the day-to-day task of A, doing something interesting like travelling, whilst B, talking about their day job in comics and or animation. Actually, yeah, at the same time as reading Luke Healy's book, which, as I say, is a really nicely done emotional journey. Do recommend. I also read Pyongyang by Guy Delisle, which is another one of his travelogue books, which I think you may have given me as a present a few years ago, actually.
Yeah, I believe so. I definitely gave you one. Yeah, I lent you my copy of Jerusalem.
You lent me Jerusalem for the podcast, and yeah, I think you gave me a copy of Pyongyang. And yes, I finally actually read it in my graphic novel reading event of mid-2020. That was really good as well. It's not quite as much of a clear beginning, middle, end story as Americana, because obviously Americana has this sort of obvious epic narrative of he's got this task to complete, and a few things happen in his personal life, which I probably shouldn't spoil, even though it feels weird treating a man's life as plot. But yeah, in case anyone wants to read it, I won't spoil what happens. And yeah, it has a certain rise and fall and a tension and a rooting for him to make it angle, which makes it quite an engaging thing to read. Whereas Guy Delisle's book, although it's beautifully executed, is just him staying in a hotel in Pyongyang for a few months.
Yeah, I do really want to read this, but I haven't actually got around to it yet. It's supposed to be fascinating because obviously very few people from the West go to North Korea.
Oh yeah, it's very interesting observationally. He does talk a lot about what it's like to actually be in Pyongyang and what he sees and what he's allowed to see ends up, as you might imagine, playing quite a substantial role in it.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't want to compare it unflatteringly to the Luke Healy book too much, because, you know, there is a degree of, you can sense him Guy Delisle getting a little bit more and more frustrated with the limits being put on him as the book goes on. There is a sort of build of emotion. It's just obviously not quite as harrowing as this man hiking over mountains and struggling to find his next bit of water or whatever.
Yeah, I guess the sort of narrative structure of a journey, like a literal journey, gives you like a really good structure for a story in that, you know, whatever else is going on, there's this sense of progression along the trail.
Yeah, the beauty of being someone who makes like narrative stuff for a living, doing something really massive endurance challengey like that, crawling along thinking, this will make a really good narrative one day. And assuming they survive that last bit of acting I just did, then yeah, it does.
I suppose when you're in the middle of like, a challenge, you're probably not appreciating how well it works as like a dramatic structure to base a book around, but it does work.
Yeah, actually another book in a similar vein while I'm doing autobiographical graphic novels. I read this one about a year ago, but whatever, it's really good. Is Follow Me In by Catriona Chapman, which is sort of a retrospective autobiographical graphic novel about a trip to Mexico she went on when she was younger with her boyfriend at the time who had a drinking problem. which was very engaging and harrowing in a not quite in a will they survive way, because they were just on holiday and nothing, it wasn't a life-destroying journey, they were just going on holiday for the most part. But yeah, there were some difficult emotional content.
Yeah, I guess the emotional stakes are high, if not the physical stakes, but still makes for a good dramatic premise for a story.
So yeah, those 3 books are all good if you want to read some real-life travel books.
Yeah, they all sound great, actually, yeah. I do really want to read more Guy Delisle, and I like the idea of the trail hiking one. That sounds interesting. Like, about 2 years ago, I walked across the Lake District, which I was quite impressed with at the time, but now seems puny compared to walking the west coast of America.
Yeah, I know, it's a massive, I mean, I guess, hikers will find a way to hike, but I didn't even realise people were doing that.
Yeah, crazy.
But yeah, if we ever see each other in real life again, you can borrow my copy of Pyongyang.
Okay, great, yeah. Something to look forward to in, like, 2030. Next up, we'll be reviewing the second series of The Boys from Amazon Prime, based on the comic by Garth Ennis and Derek Robertson. This series picks up where the first left off, with the boys hiding out after Butcher disappears and they discover the truth about how superheroes are made. Meanwhile, Starlight is growing more suspicious of Vought and has to deal with a new member of the Seven, the social media savvy Stormfront. We've seen the first 4 episodes, which is all that's been released so far. We are going to try and avoid spoilers for season 2, at least at first in this discussion. However, we will probably have to drop spoilers for season 1, so you are officially warned. So yeah, we've seen the first 4 episodes. Nick, what did you think of this series so far?
Yeah, well, for those of you who remember our last review, and who wouldn't, it's a lot like that, only slightly more confidence and kind of bleaker. They've basically carried down a sort of similar road. And yeah, it's still an extremely sort of good, confident show. It's got this sort of vein of unpredictable violence, black comedy, combined with this sort of pervasive cynicism, but with just about enough, in fact at times enough actually surprisingly deep characterisation. It doesn't just seem completely shallow and throwaway. So yeah, it's an enjoyable combination, and yeah, happily the second season seems to more or less keep up the momentum they had from the first one. It has a certain sort of swagger, I guess, the sort of ballsy confidence you get from having done your first season and definitely been successful. And yeah, they seem to be having a lot of fun carrying on further down the road and seeing how far they can go and being slightly more ridiculously over the top extreme. There's a ludicrous stunt sequence in episode 3 involving a speedboat, which I won't spoil in detail. I think it was in quite a few of the trailers actually, which is incredibly over the top, ambitious, impressive, funny, stupid. Very much a sort of, oh yeah, we're back and we've got a load more money this time because everyone loved us last time moment. So yeah, it's okay, yeah lads, we're back. If you like that, you'll love this, I think. And yeah, I'm enjoying it. I think I'll maybe get onto its relationship with the comic later because it's not actually that relevant. But yeah, I think it's definitely in itself keeping up a lot of momentum.
Yeah, this is one of those shows that sort of defies classification almost, in that it's sort of a dark comedy, but it's very dramatic at the same time, and it's not absolutely like peppered with jokes, but when there is a joke, they are pretty over the top and pretty silly and can be very funny, but it is also very, very tense. Obviously, the premise of the show is loosely a group of ex-army guys, the boys, although they almost never refer to themselves as the boys, taking on a group of evil superheroes who are basically the Justice League. It's pretty obvious, like they're led by a superhero called Homelander, who's very much like Superman, and there's one called A-Train, who's basically the Flash, and so on and so forth. They are quite scary as villains, and they were definitely scary in the first series, but I guess in the first series they were kind of building up more to the reveal that superheroes are actually evil, so they started out with them sort of pretending to be nice. Whereas I guess now that you've seen the first series and you know that the superheroes are the bad guys and they're all evil apart from Starlight, who's the one, I guess, good superhero, that they've felt the ability to go full on. These superheroes are quite creepy and scary, especially with Homelander, who is actively terrifying in this.
I don't know. Homelander's the one who's definitely like a full-on, slightly terrifying villain. The rest of them are just, I don't know, they're awful in a very sort of shallow, self-interested way, but are they actively evil? I don't know. I guess they're evil in terms of an absence of moral good, or that they just don't care. But, they've, again, well, I banged on about this at length last time, so I try not to go on too long. Last time we did The Boys, not last episode. But, yeah, one of the main differences between the TV show and the comic is the slightly more protracted effort to give some characterization to a lot of the superheroes. In the comic, the only ones who got a lot of material were Homelander and Starlight, whereas there's a vague effort to give pretty much all of them at least some degree of nuance, which I think ultimately is why the TV show probably feels slightly stronger, at least as a bit of writing. And it does mean it's interesting, because obviously, although a lot of the superheroes are kind kind of awful or kind of arseholes. Some of them are just kind of being dragged along in the wake of Homelander, who's the main arsehole, or just sort of tagged on to Homelander for the fame and the money, rather because they're actually quite as screwed up and genuinely terrifying as he is.
Yeah, no, that is a very good point, actually. The show is certainly more complicated than like a moral binary of the boys are like the good guys and the superheroes are the bad guys. You're definitely right. And also there's a degree to which they interrogate the morality of the boys, led by Butcher, played by Carl Urban, who is not a nice guy. I mean, he's got this sort of charismatic leader thing going on. He's very British, swears a lot, calls people a cunt a lot, says bollocks a lot, is basically professionally hard and British, but is also clearly like not a pleasant guy, quite screwed up, puts himself first or what he wants ahead of the boys. So there is a degree of complexity there, and that's one of the great strengths of the show, is that there is quite a lot of complexity to these characters whilst also being quite dramatic, and their drip feed of characterization is done quite well.
Well, yeah, well, could have been quite a shallow premise. You know, on paper it is, and is deepened by the fact that a lot of the characters have complicated motivations for being involved or complicated agendas that they're bringing to this basic conflict. A bunch of military hard men are going to fuck up some superheroes.
Yeah.
Although their continued use of Butcher's British accent from the comic is hilarious to me. I mean, it would be less funny if they'd actually found a British person to play it, but Carl Urban's British accent is both somehow terrible and amazing.
Yeah, one of the little sort of things I noticed in this series quite funny was they've made a sort of true crime TV show that's on the background that's kind of about the first series, and there's like the kind of, in the true crime TV show, they've turned Butcher's Britishness up to about 1 million. And there's like a bit when he's like threatening someone with a bomb and he goes like something like, "Move and I'll bollocks you," which is... Again, I think that on some level that was acknowledging the kind of the silliness of Butcher's Britishness.
I'm on some level waiting for it to actually become canonical that Butcher is actually an American man putting on a British accent. I mean, it never happened in the comic, but then again in the comic he was just written as British by a British person. Whereas, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm just over-hoping there. Carl Urban is probably just playing a British man.
At this point. Yeah. There is, like, yeah, as you said, quite a lot of deep characterization. And in fact, one of the characters who gets the most deep characterization is the Deep. See what I did there?
He's sort of. Yeah, it's a strange storyline with the Deep. The Deep, by the way, there's nothing like this in the comic for him. In the comic, he's just a background idiot. Whereas, to be honest, in the TV show, he's kind of a foreground idiot. Like, he's just a tragic arsehole. I mean, you feel kind of sorry for him because he's so pathetic. But on the other hand, he never fails to deserve it.
They are giving him some sense of like a journey and like building into him. Like, they're basically the fact that the Deep, who is basically Aquaman, they're kind of getting to the fact that because he's got gills and is quite ridiculous anyway, but mainly because he's got gills, he's got a lot of sort of like body issues and he's disgusted by himself, and that has led him to behave in a sort of arsehole-y way, which is, yeah, I suppose there's like, you know, that sort of makes sense and things like that. I mean, they never pass up the opportunity to do something funny and pathetic with the Deep. Like, there's a bit in this series when I think he's getting some form of therapy and he's talking about his childhood trauma and how when he first discovered he could talk to fish because all the fish in the pet shops were like begging for their lives, and he obviously relates this as a kind of like horrendous formative traumatic experience, but it is also hilarious. The idea of this like kid just being plagued by goldfish in tanks going like, "Please save me."
Yeah, it's both funny and sad because the Deep has obviously got some valid trauma. His body issues because of his gills are obviously kind of sad, but on the other hand, he's such a dick about it all the time, and given any opportunity to reach out in a warm way, he instead is just an obnoxious misogynist prick, which I guess is what's necessary for us to continue to enjoy his ongoing humiliation.
Yeah, but I think on some level the show is exploring what is quite a complex and also very relevant issue for today, which is the question of to what degree are, you know, these arseholes, especially arsehole men in positions of power, such as the Deep, you know, who has used his position of authority as a superhero and someone high up in this big corporation of Vought to abuse women. Yeah, they are asking questions like, to what degree is he responsible for his actions? You know, to what degree are we willing to forgive him or excuse him or at least, or even understand him based on childhood trauma, his own personal mental health problems? You know, I think they're trying to explore something like, you know, they're asking questions like about these difficult issues, which I think we're trying to grapple with as a society right now. And it's not doing it in like kind of preachy, lectury way. Like I say, whenever it does, it touches on like an issue, you know, it kind of, there's humour as well to kind of, it's not like a lecture-y show. We're a long way from the kind of the way, say, Aaron Sorkin's was approaching issues in the newsroom of just having characters yell about big issues. But also the show is exploring these things with nuance, raising difficult questions. The humour is not making fun of victims in any way, even though it's making the humour is making fun of predators. It's a quite complex, sophisticated thing they're doing in quite a sort of artfully way that you don't necessarily notice they're doing it, which is, again, one of the great strengths of the show.
Well, yeah, because in many ways the biggest crime, and the reason he's ended up in this constant loser position isn't because he did bad things, it's because he made the mistake of being obviously a slightly weak, neurotic person who didn't do bad things smoothly and confidently.
Yeah, and then Homelander, who's a more scary, more powerful asshole, but obviously he's had a lot of childhood trauma in the fact that he kind of grew up in a lab. He didn't really have a childhood. He's kind of clearly a psychopath on some level. Again, there's asking questions like, do you sympathise with him? I mean, I don't sympathise with him, and certainly as a viewer, but he's not a two-dimensional cartoon villain, which obviously, again, is like trying to explore the fact that in real life, bad people who do terrible things are not two-dimensional cartoon villains.
Yeah, the guy who plays Homelander, Anthony Starr, is really, really good in the part as well. To give him credit, it's obviously a very big part, but also one that requires a lot of these sort of subtle turns. Like, Homelander is this sort of uber abuser who switches from I'm cool, everything's cool, I'm fine, I'm chill, let's have a nice chat, to I'm going to kill you now, or it's time for me to scream at you and pin you against the wall whilst plunging my super fist into you in like a second. And it's a very quick, scary part, and he's incredibly good at it.
Yeah, no, you're right. It is definitely the performance that makes the role. And I think a lot of people who talk about like abusive people, one of the things they say is like the sensation of walking on eggshells around abusers, like, you know, they could be fine, but at any moment they could snap and suddenly be violent or something like that. And that you really get that sense from Homelander, that, you know, everyone's terrified of him. Everyone is like constantly like policing, monitoring what they say, because he could snap at any point. So that's a big source of tension in the show.
Yeah, and his big arc this year obviously is that, the woman who was sort of very heavily handling him and keeping him on a short leash to stop him going fucking batshit. Spoilers for the end of season 1. We're going to gleefully spoil the end of season 1. She died at the end of season 1, and therefore he's obviously a bit lost and a bit without guidance and just increasingly randomly just going off the handle at people.
Yeah.
And because they did such a good job of establishing it last year, because Anthony Starr is playing it so well now, it is doing a very, very good job of increasingly ratcheting up the tension, as without her to keep him in check, he's obviously clearly losing his fucking mind.
Yeah.
It's very artfully done so far, this storyline.
Yeah, and it's made also more interesting by they've introduced a new member to the Seven, another kind of fucked up villain superhero, a woman called Stormfront, which is another interesting character, a new character for Series 2. Also, one of her things is that she's very good at social media, does a lot of like Facebook or Instagram sort of live videos and stuff, and builds like her own brand, because a core part of the first series was how the superheroes are like a big corporate monolith, and they're always like product testing and audience testing the superheroes and things like that. That was quite a big element of the first series. And I think they're doing something interesting now by saying, whereas like Vought in the first series was very much like a traditional kind of media company, in that, you know, they're big audiences, they did a lot of stuff through like TV, films, national advertising campaign, this kind of very traditional way of like building like big brands. And Stormfront's coming in and disrupting that by using social media to speak directly to her fans, stirring up support for herself in a more disruptive way than Vaught's able to as like a big, quite traditional company. I mean, there's an interesting scene in the 4th episode, a conflict between Homelander and Stormfront, when Homelander's like, I'm the most popular person in the world, everyone loves me, and she's like, yeah, but love is not what you need anymore, you just need like 1,000 people to be like your dedicated soldiers, and that's what she has. And it is, I think, again, an interesting way of exploring the changing media dynamics.
As you say, it's an interesting piece of current relevance. One thing I saw people say about The Boys Season 1 is that partly because of the ways in which they have kind of stuck to the comic, a lot of the ways in which they tried to be, relevant and real-worldy were things that were kind of rooted in when the comic was actually made in the mid to late 2000s, talking about things like superheroes intervening in the Middle East, which is a very sort of, I guess, kind of Bush-era satire of superheroes in the war in Iraq or whatever. And it's interesting this year there seems to be a slightly more aggressive push to set it in the here and now.
Yeah, and like Stormfront is like storing up protests just by like getting on Instagram or whatever and demanding her followers turn up and support her. Yeah, which is, I guess they're kind of bringing it up to date. But it is, also kind of interesting to show the way things are changing. Like, Homelander tries to be, like Superman, this kind of all-American guy that like is like beloved. Stormfront's not interested in being beloved by anyone. She's just interested in getting enough people angry to support her and get her the power and attention that she wants. It's interesting how much the show really hits the nail on kind of really really interesting contemporary issues and explores them in quite a complex way without it feeling like they're just yelling at you about issues or yelling at you about serious stuff. And then after something serious, there'll then be a joke when someone gets splattered in blood, and it's just kind of funny.
It feels like the bleakness has sort of grown and spread a bit this year. It feels like a slightly more depressing watch than it did last year. Like, I don't actually remember season 1 feeling like quite as much of a depressing indictment of the times. It's possible that I'm just more depressed than I was when I watched season 1, you know. It's not a cheerful time in the world. But yeah, the show does feel like it's very much going even further into a more aggressively bleak. The bad guys are winning. The small relatable moments with the superheroes are becoming slightly fewer and far between. The sympathetic characters are having a worse and worse time. The Homelander's going off the deep end. Stormfront is awful and she is winning. I mean, obviously we are at the midway point of the series, the season, whatever. Yeah, the midway point of season 2. Things are bad because they need to be particularly bad at this point. So, you know, maybe if we come back at the end of the season, there'll be some sort of light at the end of the tunnel. But yeah, the one thing that does seem to have, in a weird way, come back harder from the comic in season 2 is the pervasive cynicism of it all. You know, the corporations are winning. The evil is spreading.
Yeah, I think there's an element of that because the first series was very much kind of like peeling back the layer of what's going underneath behind this kind of wholesome all-American superhero-iness. So, and like, you know, the first series, it starts with Starlight becoming like the newest member of the Seven, and she's like naive and optimistic and all about doing good. And then as she kind of goes into Vought and becomes part of the Seven, she discovers how rotten and evil it is, like beneath the surface. So this is kind of the first series as this arc of kind of light to darkness broadly. They've done that, you know, they're kind of now just in darkness, I think, is part of the reason they've stripped away the veneer.
Well, yeah, and, you know, again, in terms of it being a meta commentary on superheroes, to the extent that it is, you know, we're all aware, even much as we enjoy our superhero media, that it is very much the tool of massive corporations. So it's not as if the metaphor doesn't hold.
Yeah, exactly. But no, it's just very entertaining. You know, it's funny. It's when the performances are good all round. Carl Urban's British accent aside, you know, I think everyone's very well cast, and you're definitely right to single out Anthony Starr as possibly the person who's really delivering like a kind of a grade A performance. But I think everyone is absolutely excellent. One person I really like is Thomas Capon, who's Frenchy. He's a really interesting actor because he was originally in Le Haine, which is a gritty sort of social realist French drama about how difficult it is to live on a social housing project in the outer areas of Paris. It's a cinematic classic of the kind of social realist semi-documentary style of filmmaking, and he's had an interesting career. He's come all the way from Le Haine via things like Three Kings to now being in Amazon Prime TV shows.
Yeah, no, I always find his character and Kimiko particularly interesting just because they were so underdeveloped in the comic and they're getting so much more material here. And yeah, they do a good job of actually exploring a bit more what they're like rather than just being this kind of background comedy characters. Because, you know, in the comic, they're basically the muscle. They just sort of hang around in the background being slightly weird, usually in a sort of comic relief way. I think they both get like 1-2-part story each, fleshing out their trauma, and the rest of the time they're just background weirdness, and if a fight happens and they go batshit and kill a load of people. I mean, Kimiko doesn't even get a name in the comic. She's known exclusively as the female. I can see why they changed that.
Yeah, no, I think it's good that they're developing the characters and stuff, and you do get a real sense of who they are and their conflict and their drama, yeah.
Although, interestingly, Mother's Milk doesn't really seem to have a name.
No, he does not, but I guess he's just referred to as Mother's Milk. I can't remember if they explained that or not.
But yeah, there are occasions in the first few episodes where Huey gets into borderline annoying territory for me. He just gets a lot of screen time because he's the main character and he just uses it to whinge, and it wasn't that interesting, but happily it seems to be picking up for him.
I have pretty much, the exact same note, that I do find Stewie's just endless complaining. It is slightly annoying, and I know where this arc is going, that eventually he will bury the hatchet with Butcher and they'll get back to being their sort of friendly, abusive double team thing will kind of come back, and it's kind of, I know where this is going and there'll be some kind of moment of forgiveness at some point, and I kind of feel like it's just like treading water till it gets to that point.
Well, I mean, I don't know, I was going to say something that spoils the end of episode 4. Shall we put down some sort of spoiler warning and spoil the end of episode 4?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So, up to the end of episode 4 of season 2 of The Boys, there will now be some spoilers. Only a couple of small ones, but spoilers nonetheless. Here we go. Yeah, at the end of episode 4, both their relationships with their respective love interests seem to have either ended or at least come to a bit of a break. So I guess this will be what drives them to go back together and focus more on killing people. Yeah,
which is very much where it's going. Which I think is good, like you say, because if moving the Huey character on from just being sort of moany would improve the show, yeah.
Again, it's interesting for me as a comic reader because a lot of this stuff isn't in the comic. In the comic, Rebecca Butcher is just dead. She's never in it at all alive. The kid isn't in it, she's not in it, they're all just dead. And also in the comic, Starlight and Huey's relationship they don't really find out the truth about each other till quite near the end. So they've sort of gone beyond that as well. So yeah, it's all interesting material to me. But yeah, it looks like they're using it to bring them back together.
Yeah, well, it's good that there's some interesting surprises for you as a comic reader.
Yeah, and also, since the other thing I was going to talk about in the spoiler section is Stormfront. Speaking of Stormfront, I don't know if you've come across this in your trivia, but you know they've... Actually, yeah, you're on a computer, right, to record this internet podcast?
Yes, I have computer.
If you Google Stormfront The Boys comic, or something like that, you might be able to find... Just go to Google Images, you might be able to see the original Stormfront design.
Hang on.
It's,
let's I am doing that live. We've got a live reveal coming up. Image. It's a man.
It's a man with a straightforward "Hello, I am Nazi Superman"
design.
Oh
yeah, with a swastika cape.
Yes.
Right. Okay, that is less subtle than what they're going for now.
Yeah. I mean, as I've mentioned before, the lack of massive brutal subtlety in the Boys comic. How a lot of the superheroes are basically one-joke characters who exist to be evil and then get killed.
Yeah, so Stormfront was just a Nazi.
A Nazi Superman. I mean, he was very scary in his way because he was, a hard bastard. But he was just a great big Nazi Superman.
Yeah, I think, right, that makes more sense also because one thing that I wondered... Hang on, I'm just going to confirm this. Yeah, that answers something which I'd wondered about, which is people may know that Stormfront is a well-known white nationalist, racist Nazi website. It's been around on the internet for a while. It is a gathering point for fuckheads and Nazis. Yeah, I guess they were alluding... I assume they were alluding to that in the name of the character. If the character is a Nazi and called Stormfront. I mean, it's possible also that Stormfront takes its name from something Nazi-y, as in like a name for some German Nazi military unit or something like that.
I don't know. I mean, obviously, Comic Stormfront has been around since the mid-2000s. I don't know when the website was started. But it's not subtle, as I say. My partner obviously did not know the spoilers from the comic, but she did clock the name Stormfront.
Yeah, which I didn't realise until now. Obviously, it works in that she also shoots lightning. This approach is more subtle, certainly, but it is a good twist when you find out that Stormfront is evil Nazi. Is there someone worse than Homelander? Possibly.
I like their angle here. Again, it's slightly more subtle. I think by making her, I don't know if likeable is the right word, but she is, watchable and broadly likeable in a sort of, sticking it to the corporation way. Before you find out how incredibly awful she is at the end of episode 3.
Yeah.
She is sort of likeable and, refreshing among the superheroes. And then slowly realising that her, anti-establishment stick it to the man stance is because she's actually just a Nazi.
Yeah.
It's a cleverer critique of, the real-life modern Nazis.
Yeah, again, they're exploring a complex, relevant issue today, which is some of the people railing against the corporations and the establishment aren't also the good guys. They might have their own fucked up, horrible agenda, even if they, they look like the good guys because they're objecting to the big, overbearing corporation. So again, they're kind of exploring that. And also the fact that hate mongers can now appeal directly to hate-ees, I suppose, to coin a phrase.
They can now monger their hate directly to the masses.
Yeah, exactly, and that has given them a lot of power, which is, again, something the show is exploring. Whereas traditional media gatekeepers maybe would have kept some of that out in the past. That's no longer possible.
Good work, the boys. Some strong Nazis.
Finally, this episode, we will be reviewing the first series of Biohackers from Netflix. Mia is starting medical school in the German town of Freiburg, where she is interested in studying under the legendary Dr. Lorenz. However, Mia harbours a secret involving the death of her brother and a childhood connection to Dr. Lorenz. We've seen the entire first series, so Nick, what did you think of it?
I'll be honest, I was a little worried during episode 1 of this at times, as it seemed slightly, bland. But once we got to the ending of episode 1 and episode 2, and I sort of realised what we were doing here was a sort of full-on thriller story of multiple agendas and betrayal and ridiculous master plans, I kind of warmed up to it. Like, it's a properly silly one as well. Like, the main character, Mia, has a master plan so complicated that it basically relies on her being able to read minds and see the future. Which, although this is a sci-fi show, they've not yet revealed she can do. Yeah, and it's sort of a combination of that and sort of YA melodrama. There's a love triangle, there's a lot of sneaking around a mysterious facility whilst angsting about her family. Yeah, it's fun, it's very silly, but it's sort of fast-paced with it. Like, yeah, if this had been 13 hour-long episodes, that may well have become quite tedious. But 6 45-minute episodes actually worked pretty well. It moved tangibly forward each time. A load of stupid shit happened. There was likeable sidekicks, a charismatic villain. It's quite broad strokes, but yeah, it was entertaining enough to keep me watching. I actually churned through it in about 3 sittings, I think. I just ended up chaining episodes a few times because I was just enjoying how fast it was just chattering through things. Yeah, it's fun. We're probably not going to go on about the deep way in which it's tackling the issues in the same way as we did on on The Boys, but it is fun.
Yeah, this is not, I guess, really one that goes into exploring issues and, gets as far as, like, experimenting on children is bad without their consent, certainly.
But experimenting on animals is fine.
And making them glow in the dark.
Yeah.
Although, yeah, the glow-in-the-dark mouse is only in like the first episode. I liked this as well, yeah. It's got some good twists. Keeps, the twists coming right up until the end of the show. There's quite a lot, rising tension throughout. I think one of the more interesting things is the Mia's sort of love interest, Jasper, who's Dr. Lorenz's assistant, who she sort of falls in with partly as a way to get closer to the doctor and to give her excuses to sneak around her labs and things like that. I think he goes on an interesting journey when he seems a bit hapless at first and by the end is kind of properly sinister. That I thought was quite well handled. Yeah, it's overall an enjoyable show. I think characterization is not the strength of the show, especially Mia's friends were somewhat sort of two-dimensional sidekicks. There's the smart Asian one. There's the kind of hard-drinking, hard-shagging student. There's the one who kind of is into body modification things, who's kind of the comic relief one, who I suppose has got maybe a little bit more personality than the others, but not a lot.
I was a little less convinced by Jasper's arc. I mean, I didn't hate the character, but I felt like, the sinister turn you mentioned perhaps came a bit too hard for me. I was like, have we done enough for him to go that evil? Okay, sure. I mean, this is a silly show. I'm willing to just roll with it. It's not something I'm going to do an essay on. But yeah, that was the one part where I was a bit sort of okay. Although I do enjoy the fast pace of this show, they did hit that quite hard.
Yeah.
That was quite a sharp turn.
Yeah, I suppose there's an interesting reveal that, I suppose it depends how many spoilers we want to drop for this show.
Yeah, there are reveals that do justify his character moves. He has had bad things happen to him, but you can see why he might react badly, I suppose. I don't know. I think everything happens in such a compressed time frame, but I was a bit, maybe slightly unconvinced. But, I guess maybe he's just a bit over-attached, the poor lamb. But yeah, no, I know what you mean about the sidekicks as well. They're broad strokes, but they just needed to keep me watching.
Yeah, and it is, like I say, it's quite a short show, which again is, as you say, is very much the strength of it. Like the pace and the tension is what I really like. There's a lot of sneaking around labs and in offices and things like that, but they always find a way to make it tense. Like, there's a bit when Mia's snuck into Dr. Lorenz's office and she's trying to print out some crucial piece of information or evidence before the doctor comes back and realises that she's like stealing reports. And, it's a scene I'm sure I've seen done before, but like they really managed to ratchet up the tension. Like, will she get everything printed? Then the printer runs out of paper and she's got to find paper. It's just little things like that, that's like they are quite tense and like kind of really quite engaging scenes.
There were like two separate like major tension scenes which hinge around printers running out of paper, weren't there? They've really hit on that as their relatable point.
Yeah, that's the age we live in.
Is it though? I mean, would you really use actual paper nowadays?
No, I guess not. I suppose it is probably the age of about 10 years ago. I suppose like it's needed for the dramatic tension. There's at least they've got away from like tension involved around bars moving across computer screens as they try to upload, and there's no bits of someone just punching keyboards randomly going I'm in. Regardless of the sort of silliness of the show, I do feel they do quite a good job of like escalating the tension and finding sources of tension as much as possible.
Oh yeah, the show is silly, and although Mia does at times have to be a shade omniscient for her plans to work, she does still fail enough for it not to get quite stupid to the point it punctures the show. Like her cons are successful up to the point where they need to not be successful for the show to actually have tension.
Yeah.
And I quite liked the sort of moral ambiguity of it. To be honest, if anything, it lost a bit for me when we got towards the end and Mia was allowed to be more of a straightforward hero. But yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, the moral ambiguity was quite interesting in that I was thinking like, are you supposed to relate to Mia? Is she a sympathetic person? There's one episode where she poisons her flatmate, which is, not a particularly nice thing to do because it helps her with her schemes.
Well, yeah, exactly. Also, there was a disappointing amount of biohacking in the end. Like, I found some of that stuff quite interesting, like the glowing mice and the Ollie character, who's doing weird biohacking experiments on himself. Yeah. Like, okay, this is a show at biohacking, we're doing some biohacking, I can see that. But it doesn't seem to actually play much into the plot in the end. It's just about some sort of generic disease shit. Yeah,
that's some medical experiment that's being conducted on Mia when she was a child.
Yeah, I was sort of hoping for a bit more of the sort of fun, interesting, crunchy biohacking instead of this just general, we must cure the vague condition shit.
Yeah, I suppose that was stronger in the early ones. And her flatmate has like the glow-in-the-dark plant, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Although I think it's funny when the flatmate who's into body modification and biohacking, he puts magnets in his hands and then gets stuck to the work surface in the kitchen.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's good shit.
That was very funny. The tension is sort of the source of what's good about this show. Some of the sort of medical stuff I think was a bit nonsensical. One bit that kind of stretched the bound of credulity is there's a bit when this is possibly spoilery, so I'm dropping spoiler warning now. Yeah. There's a bit when Lorenz releases a disease and Mia sort of finds the cure, and she just shows up at the hospital, and the doctor basically is like, yes, I will inject these 6 people with this random blue goo that a total stranger has given me without testing it. And I was a bit like, I don't think they do that.
Well, they had their moments on the train earlier, though. It's
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
It made sense in the show, but it was it's one of the sort of silly moments about the show, which is just like, yeah, she sneaks into the hospital, gives them this blue goo, and they're like, yeah, we'll just inject this into people, see what happens. But yeah, I think that's kind of the appeal of the show, really, rather than the sort of downside to it.
Yeah, there's a part of me that's a bit sort of lazy and sort of, if I'm gonna make extra effort to read subtitles rather than just listening to voices, I want it to be, something properly grown up, mature, and heavy premium telly like Dark or Borgen or The Killing or something. Whereas, surely I could watch silly young adult angst sci-fi in English. But yeah, no, this is quite fun.
Yeah, it's good that it comes in every language. It's a global movement. I quite liked the way they captured the sort of chaos and disorder of being a student as well. The drinking, the parties. That came across quite well. This is just more of like a side note than anything. One of my favourite punk bands of the moment, Idols, they had a song of theirs on the soundtrack, which was used quite well, yeah. It's in the scene when they're in a student bar, and I think Jasper has worked out Mia's not all she claims to be, but Mia's still pretending, and he confronts her. The Idol song Never Fight a Man with a Perm is sort of playing in the background, which is a song with a real kind of like rising energy and tension to it, and it works with the scene with a sort of rising tension as well. So I appreciated that.
Yeah. The tension is quite neatly managed in that, people start to suspect Mia at around the right time. She's efficient, but she's not stupidly uber efficient. It's already been renewed for a second season, as you might have guessed from the... Well, I don't know, I guess they had no way of knowing, but there's a big obvious cliffhanger at the end, and it's now been renewed, so I guess we will at some point, presumably in the future, get to find out what happens.
Yeah, no, I think I'll definitely watch the second series and see what happens next.
My partner was a bit disappointed when she found out there was a cliffhanger in a second season. She was a bit sort of, I thought it was perfect as it was, I was hoping they'd just leave it. It's like, no, it turns out there's always more stupid twists.
Yeah, why give up on a good thing? Just keep it going. Ironically, that's the end.
Ironically, yeah, that is we are at this point giving up on this segment. Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence. Thank you very much for listening. If you want yet more Moderate Fantasy Violence related content, you can go to our website, of course, at moderatefantasyviolence.com, which features essays by Alistair on various related topics, as well as, of course, all our old episodes and other audio clips. And if you enjoy all that material, you can also go to your podcast app, especially if your podcast app is iTunes, and leave us a nice review, which will hopefully increase the number of content enjoyers in the world.
You can also get more from us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence or going to facebook.com/Moderate Fantasy Violence. You can find us on Twitter as well, where we are at MFV Podcast. You can also find me on Twitter, where I'm at Alistair J.R. Ball, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com.
And yep, I've been Nick Bryan. You can find me online at nickbryan.com or on Twitter at nickmb. And if you want to buy that Kickstarter comic I mentioned at the start of the episode, again, it would be very much appreciated if anyone wants to support. You can go to kickstarter.nickbryan.com, or the links which should be available in the show notes or our social media, to buy my new urban fantasy crime snow comic And It Snowed with me, Robert Ahmed and DC Hopkins. Thank you very much, and if you just want more Moderate Fantasy Violence, then good news, we'll be back in 2 weeks as usual, when we will be covering the new comedy drama series Teenage Bounty Hunters and the new YA Sherlock Holmes film Enola Holmes, both of which are, yes, once again on Netflix. We will see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye. Yeah. That answers some question that I'd wondered, which is because you may know that Stormfront is also a popular, well-known, well, I say popular. No, I'm going to start this again.
Beloved by Alistair.